Well, today's recording is about the Sunday of Year B, the 24th week of Ordinary Time. And one of the readings, the Gospel reading in fact, is about when Jesus asked who people thought he was. So the booklet actually says that. Who do you say I am? Then what we need for this is the diorama background. I actually think that they were probably walking along a road, so that's why I've chosen a road. And as it describes here, it's good to have the 12 apostles, or some of the 12 apostles. Quite a few of them are here. I've put them in pairs at the time because often we start to think about them going off in pairs to preach the good news. And then others who are also disciples, and they're just a selection of characters taken from what I call the gospel characters kit. So they're kind of multi-use. And you also will need the magnet maps. Well, I say need, it's also good to have the magnet maps, as you will see shortly. Now, here are the core concepts or the doctrine points. I'll just read it as it says. Jesus put a question to his disciples. Who do people say I am? Peter affirmed his belief, saying, "You are the Christ." Jesus then foretold his suffering, death, and resurrection. He went on to tell the disciples that whoever would follow him needed to be prepared to suffer too. So that gives you a bit of a summary, a quick orientation. The materials I've already explained to you. So these are words that you would explain to children ahead of the passage. They are listed in the booklet. Caesarea Philippi. Well, for that, it's quite handy to be able to just call up your map or bring up your map and identify exactly where that is. Caesarea Philippi is actually a town here, about 40 kilometers away from the Sea of Galilee. And actually it was a place where there was a very big spring running clear, fresh water into the River Jordan. And that's why it's kind of a little bit of a bump there, a little bit of an emphasis of water there. It was a big spring. And it was also a place that was frequented by the pagan for worship. They would have their temples in that area and offer sacrifices, etc. So it's good for the students to be able to, or the children to be able to identify and become familiar where these things happened. This happened in a very pagan district, this particular discussion. It was actually very interesting when you think about it, because they were surrounded by pagan worshippers and pagan temples. And Jesus, in the context of that, said to them, "Who do people say that I am?" Another word is rebuke. A simple word, but it's good to explain it. It means to express sharp disapproval or a criticism of some kind. So when you understand that, and the children understand that, they can see just how strong it was, what Peter said to Jesus. Then there's the word Messiah, which we often hear, but children may not know the meaning of that word, and we can also not necessarily remember what the word means. It actually means, in the Jewish language, the anointed one, the one who is anointed. And for the Jews, the Messiah was the special anointed one that they were waiting for in order to deliver Israel. They were imagining it was deliverance from their oppressors or rulers of the time, which at that particular time was the Romans. So and also that this would be a king. They understood it would be a king descended of the line of David, King David. So that's Messiah. And then there's this other very interesting phrase that Jesus used a lot of times, and it is capitals, the Son of Man. Now, we're thinking, the children will be thinking, if they're listening carefully, they'll be thinking, what does that actually mean? And basically Jesus used that term to refer to himself. It was practically all his own reference, and he described himself not as a son of man, but as the Son of Man. And it was a title he referred to himself about 82 times recorded in the New Testament. It was a title that inferred several things. It inferred humanity. So he is saying that he is truly human. It was also a phrase that indicated humility, bearing in mind that Jesus is the second person of the Blessed Trinity and who became fully human as well as remaining fully divine. And it's also a phrase signifying deity. That being emphasized by the way he used the term, not using it as a Son of Man, but as the Son of Man. The term Son of Man comes up a lot in the Old Testament times, and I won't expand on that further than what I've said today, but that's how also one can deduce the meaning of the word Son of Man. So here we go with the presentation. It's quite a good idea to speak in such a way that the focus is on the figurines rather than on yourself. And this is how it goes. In this Sunday's Gospel reading, we hear Jesus foretelling his own death, his suffering, his death, and his resurrection. And we will hear Peter's response and how this gives Jesus an opportunity to tell us something very important. We're reading from Mark's Gospel, probably the first Gospel to be written. Matthew is largely built on Mark's. Oh, I light the candle. Here we go. Now, the Rust writing actually says this: indicate Jesus with the apostles close to him, and then have the other figures placed some distance away, but not too far away, and then move the figurines at the appropriate time. And a little reminder in this particular booklet to avoid moving the figures and speaking at the same time. Why do we do that? We do that because, in actual fact, it helps the children to truly focus. They're either listening to what you're saying, or they're observing and becoming involved with the movement. So let's see how we go today. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist. Others say Elijah, and still others say one of the prophets." "But what of you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and to be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples. And said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel," which means the good news, "will save it." Quite a gospel reading, isn't it? There are lots of things we can think about here. I'm talking to the children now. I wonder why Jesus asked the question, "Who do people say that I am?" I wonder why Jesus then asked the question, "Who do you say I am?" Speaking to his disciples, his close disciples. Another thought here, very interesting. If Jesus knew that he was going to suffer and die and rise again, I wonder if he also knew what Peter was going to say, and how he, Jesus, would use the opportunity to give a very important message. Something we can think about when we are making our choices today. What is the important message? And what does it mean for me today? Then you move on to offering. If there is time in this Sunday school, there is likely to be, if it's children's liturgy, it's less likely that there'll be a great deal of time once pondering has happened and questions have been thought about. But you can give the children something to take away, a mindful colouring in, an interesting image of this story being told, or a simple art drawing activity or a craft activity that relates to the event, and they can do that and think at the same time. I'll share with you something I sometimes use with children in the classroom. If we'd had a passage like that, and we want to give children an opportunity to think about it, they could have their mindful colouring in there, or their very quiet drawing, or craft work, and they will love to listen to the story again. And you can read it to them again with expression, or you might find a very good recording of it from somebody who's read the Bible in some audiovisual platform. And they can be listening to that as they are doing their work. And then another thing they can do is to, if you're prepared and you have the pages marked, because let's face it, there's not a lot of time, reading the account from the Bible itself or from a children's Bible. And another thing that they can think about doing is writing something in their journal, writing a prayer, writing a letter to Jesus, asking him things about this, or thinking through the passage in the presence of God.